All right, guys. Well, we wanted to just do this may end up turning into like a series of some of these calls as we kind of just do like a vision frame refresh because a lot of times I get an opportunity to teach some of a lot of our church planters as they kind of go through the art of the start for the first time, and we walk through just a lot of just the vision frame content. It's about maybe half or better of some of the conversation that we have on the front end of training all of our church planters. And obviously, with being in the midst of launching a new organization, sometimes moving to a new city, building a launch team, and all the different whirlwind of activities that take place when it comes to launching a church, some of the vision aspects kind of get a back seat to some of that stuff. And so, and then also you just deal with the frustrations and just the reality of the turnover of your team within those first couple years in particular, but even ongoing. I was talking with Adam, lives in Laramie, Wyoming, in a college town, university town of, you get students for a season and then they come and go. But we've even talked about that a little bit from any type of a church where we used to teach or still do teach a tool called the church as a river, and just kind of viewing church as a river of people kind of enter into your stream at one point, and then on average, just depending on wherever you are in your culture and different size of community, people will leave your church at some point in the future for any given reason, whether they get a new job, whether they get frustrated with something, whether they just end up moving across town or across the state or different things of that nature. They move off to go to college somewhere, whatever that ends up being. But on average, sometimes people will stay with you for 2.5 to 3 years. Um, and just, that fluctuates just based on your culture and different things of that nature. But being able to be in the mindset of like, while we have these people for a season, what is the vision that we have for their lives? What is the goal that we have to be able to walk them through? So that's kind of at a granular level as you kind of realize the engagement that you have with any given person, but then you have long-term impact over time as well, to be able to play into that as well. And so the vision frame was a tool. I want to do a quick recap of this tool because the vision frame was one of those things that I got introduced to back in 2015 when I sat through the art of the start for the very first time. And it was one of those things, it was just like an aha moment for me that I just kind of saw vision in a different way, and it was simplified and it made sense, and it was just like, okay, like now I have a place to be able to hang the language of what is vision, what is mission, what are values, what is strategy, like all these different types of things that we talk about in leadership. But I just didn't have a clear sense of like what are all of these things and how do they play nicely together. And that's why I was kind of drawn to the vision frame, as Phil kind of taught us that in the art of the start. So just as a real quick recap, just want to walk you through what exactly we're talking about here. So the vision frame has gone through several iterations, but at a base level, we talk about the mission as what we're ultimately supposed to be doing. This is kind of pictured as, you can kind of see right there, as like a compass in your hand as a leader, to realize that this is what we do no matter what we do. So I could tell you, so I live here in Colorado, I could just tell you we are headed west. Like no matter what we're going to do, we are going to head west. That's our direction. This is that's kind of our North Star, type of a thing, whatever that looks like. He talks about some missional reorientation language, which feels a little bit outdated because the vision frame came out in 2008 at the height of like the church growth movement, and church leaders were kind of swinging back from just grow, 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 grow to back to an understanding of like what are we ultimately supposed to be accomplishing as a church. And that was the whole missional reorientation that kind of sparked a lot of conversation, just more towards intentional disciple making and things of that nature, particularly in the early 2000s when churches were just exploding, and we were seeing a ton of people attending church, but not a lot of people actually growing up into disciple makers through activity in church. So understanding our mission, this is what we do no matter what we do. Values are kind of that burning fire inside of the heart of the leadership team, Why do we do what we do? These are the motivations, the missional motives of the leadership team. These are culture shaping identifiers, not necessarily a restatement of your beliefs, but just those culture shaping identifiers of why we do what we do. The strategy then answers the question, how do we go about accomplishing the mission? How do we do what we do? If the mission is to, make disciples of all nations, we should have a very clear picture. And Dallas Willard even asks, some of these simple questions of like, just this is your litmus test as a church leader. Like, what is your plan for making disciples and is it working? Like, what is the clear cut strategy? Like, this is how we go about making disciples. And so from a broad level perspective and a vision frame context, this is the missional map rather than leading with just a menu of all of these slew of Bible studies and programs and events and different things that people can be a part of in your church context. We want to be intentional about just like you do this, you do this, you do this, like just a clear pathway of helping to develop people into disciple makers. And then at the top of the vision frame, we kind of view that as a scoreboard or the target on the wall. This is the missional life marks of a believer. What are we actually trying to instill in people? Like, when do we actually know we are successful at developing disciple makers, people that abide in Christ, people that are being able to invest in others? They're growing in their generosity, they're growing in XYZ areas. Like, what are those differentiators or identifiers that you want to be able to instill in the lives of people? And so, even in that conversation about church as a river. Let's say we have people for this amount of time. What are the characteristics and competencies that we're trying to instill in these people during that season? And just kind of structuring your ministry to evolve around that, to revolve around that. The last one, and where we're going to focus today, is the idea of vision proper. And we call it vision proper because all of these things together make up kind of the core identity of your church. They are the culture shaping pieces of what we do and why, how we go about doing it, when we're successful. But then we ask the question of the picture in the middle, where is God taking us in light of all of this? In light of this disciple making identity, where is God now leading us? And we identify some of those mountaintops and milestones along the way, along the journey of just realizing, okay, if we live out this disciple making identity, where then could God take us over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years? What does that actually look like? And that's where we're going to double click on our conversation today. So the book Church Unique came out in 2008,
Oh,
introduced the vision frame for the first time, and helping at the height of the church growth movement, where every church leader was just kind of like copying, pasting some big name church vision, of whether that was we wanted to be like a Willow Creek church or a purpose driven church or a Life Point church or a whatever big name church. The heartbeat behind the vision frame was to uncover the unique nature of how God's crafted you and your leadership in your time and place and your context, developing some of that stuff. 8 years later, Mancini kind of writes the book God Dreams to further develop the vision proper aspect of the vision frame. So as we walk through what that looks like, he kind of offers one primary tool called the Horizon Storyline, which is what we're going to look through. And then also 12 templates, which we're not going to dive into during too much during our time here. But those 12 templates are there just to kind of assist on your way of creating a long range vision for your church. So I want to introduce this tool simply by using a picture like this. When we physically see, when we look out, say you're driving in a car or something like that. So I live on the Front Range in Colorado, just north of Denver. My parents live on the western slope, on the west side of Colorado, almost to Utah. And so whenever I hit Denver and I start heading west, I can look, and right in front of me is the steering wheel and the dashboard with all of my gauges. I kind of look beyond that into like the mid ground where I'm like checking traffic, and like where I'm looking to gauge like where the speed limit signs and all those things that I need to ignore, right? But just like where am I looking when I'm driving? And then you have the mountains in the background. But then beyond that is kind of my destination. And so kind of tying that to this picture, like when we physically see, we have the ability to transfer back and forth from nearsighted to farsighted and back again. So if we wanted to kind of chop this picture up like this, we could say, we have kind of the foreground is where if you're a fisherman, you'd stick your stringer in the water. The midground is where you would cast out to start your fishing. The background is kind of the mountains and the church and the bridge, and then there's what you can't quite see yet, which we call that kind of beyond the horizon of where you're looking. And if we wanted to, we could slice this up even further and get a little bit more detailed. Well, the book God Dreams kind of takes that idea of how we physically see and translates that into a visionary leadership tool that looks like this, where you have your beyond the horizon is kind of a long range, 5 to 20 year vision, which currently I'm kind of encouraging leaders to shoot for 2030. Like it's a nice round number, nice good destination. If you don't have one of these type of tools set up yet, that's a good 6 year vision to be able to run towards. And then the background would be a 3 year vision. The mid ground would be your most important thing for this calendar year. And then your foreground would be a 90-day goal or a 90-day initiatives. Oftentimes in Nexus, we'll talk about this even just within the church cycle of 120 days or every 4 months, right? So you do like January to Easter, or January to like post or to summertime almost. And then you have like the summer months of May, June, July, August, and then kind of you have your fall launch of September, October, November through Christmas, December. And then it kind of starts over again. So kind of those ministry seasons. But regardless of the exact time frame, whether it's quarterly or through the ministry seasons, the idea is that renewal is built in to the vision, where you would actually be revisiting your vision every 3 to 4 months to renew it to see what's the most important thing right now. So you're looking at a beyond the horizon dream. What is the big God-sized dream that you have for your church? And then you have 3 or 4 background objectives that you feel like you need to accomplish in order to see that dream kind of come to fruition. These are kind of, you almost view it as like that jar. You probably remember that illustration sometimes, or that science experiment that you've seen where you have a big jar and you have some big rocks, and then you have little pebbles and you have sand and then you have water, and the only way that you can fit all of those in is if you start with the big rocks first. So you start from biggest to smallest, because if you start with the sand first, nothing else fits inside of it. And so this is the idea of like, what are those big objectives? What are those big rocks that you would have to have in place in order to pursue that long range dream? So one big dream, 4 objectives, one rally cry or kind of your wildly important goal for this calendar year, and then 4 initiatives that you need to identify and pursue right now as you're going through that. So I want to give a couple of examples through this as we're looking at how this kind of works itself out. Some of these are older examples, but here's a church in Houston, a church plant in Houston that starts. This wasn't a Nexus church in particular, but one that I think Mancini actually worked with. So this is a very shorthand version of how to articulate some of this. So you could double click on any one of these 10 boxes and it would really open up a lot of depth under each one of those areas. And so their beyond the horizon dream was ushering in renewal as people far from God warmly embrace the real love of Jesus. Their background big objectives were 100 fresh baptisms, 20 house churches, multiplying to that, having a leadership pipeline with 100 leaders being developed. And then they want to have identified their first church planter. Now, this church hadn't even launched yet, but that was some of their big God-sized objectives that they wanted to achieve within the first 3 years of launching their church. Then you move to their very first 1 year goal is that they wanted a thriving congregation publicly launched with 100 participants on mission. So that's fairly self-explanatory. But then you get into just kind of the granular, like, okay, what do we have to do right now? What are those 4 initiatives that we're focused on right now? And you have the plant teams multiplying to 5 house churches. So over 3 years, their goal was to get to 20. Right now, they were just, making progress towards that. They wanted to start monthly worship services, right? So everything that you have to do in regards of launching a church to actually make that happen. Then you move towards communal mission training because they wanted to have 100 participants living on mission. So they had to identify and train towards that, of however that was defined in their context. And then the last one was a very intentional driver around unified and urgent prayer. And we'll talk about a little bit more about these because this one can feel a little generic, as like, yes, we're believers. Yes, we all pray. Like, obviously, we're going to be praying for the success of our church. This goes a little bit deeper than that as a specific initiative that you want to have for like a church, or for in this case a church plant, where they were specifically praying for very intentional things as they were developing and getting ready to launch their church. So they had could have been a lot more depth underneath that. So I want to give you a couple more examples. Here's one from a church that I worked with several years ago in Kansas. They had a long range vision just to be a church planting church, very network driven. Background vision was to multiply to 40 discipleship groups and then identify their next church planter. SOS team, I believe, was as part of one of them wanting to be like a hub in the community and meeting a lot of needs. That was kind of a response team to a lot of um, different types of just needs that would come up in the community. I forget specific examples of what they were hoping for, but it was more of like a response team. Whenever needs came up, they were equipped and prepared to actually answer the call on that. Their mid-ground year was 12 discipleship groups, and then they had to develop and clarify and identify what is the specific discipleship group training that we wanted to do in their foreground. So they knew this was a huge aspect of what they wanted to do already. They identified a goal of 40 over the next 3 years, and then to start out 12 by the end of that calendar year. They were in the midst of a relocation, so they wanted to be able to, just prepare for launch in that regard. And so there was a lot of different aspects around that. So they identified 2 different initiatives there, and then casting the vision. So after going through a 2-day visionary planning retreat or a God Dreams retreat, they knew that they had to kind of clarify some of this stuff and be able to get everybody on board in their church. Another example here, church in Windsor, Colorado. So it's very image driven. Obviously, you can double click on these. There's a lot more depth underneath some of this stuff. But several years ago, I did a retreat for this church. Targeting Windsor was their primary focus over the next 5 years. Developing like a discipleship program, planting their next church. They wanted to be in their building over the next 3 years. And then they came up with an idea of something that they were already doing. They were doing a board called See a Need, Meet a Need. And so they had to figure out a way of tracking Sandman, or see a need, meet a need. And they wanted to meet 2018 needs for the year of 2018. And then they wanted to meet 10,000 needs over the course of the next 3 years. So that was one their plan for long range. And then short term, this is a a tool, or where they wanted to talk about, sorry, this tool is here to serve you, not you to serve the tool as a church leader. And so understanding very practical implications of needs that you're already focusing on is one way to just understand how you can just kind of plug and play initiatives that you already need happening. So one of those for this church was they needed a men's ministry leader because somebody had either just stepped down or retired or whatever it was. But that was their little picture of a minion, is that they needed a men's ministry leader to be able to fill that position. And that was they knew that was going to take a lot of time and energy to be able to move towards that. A lot of building preparation work, and a lot of conversations around everything that goes into that. So that was a big initiative. And then they realized that they didn't really have a clear definition of what a disciple was. So that was another aspect of that. So they were missing that top side of the vision frame, or the measure side of the vision frame. The last one that I want to show you, I'm not going to go through all of these things in detail, but rather illustrate the fact that if your vision isn't visible, whether that is in a physical location or in a digital space that you visit pretty much weekly, your vision will not get accomplished. It'll be out of sight and out of mind. And that's one of the primary things that we say when it comes to execution on vision, is that if your vision isn't visible, it's not going to happen. And so this is a chalkboard that existed right when you walked into, so I this was a chalkboard. I took a picture of this when I did my God Dream certification down at a big church in Parker. But when you walked into this little area of their office space, this was the first thing that you saw. So everybody that came to work at the church saw this as they were walking into their facility or into their office space. And so they knew that they were all about this over the next 5 years, these things over the next 3 years, but all the way down to like, what are we supposed to be focused on right now in our leadership? So I'm going to try and quickly do this because I want to get to a lot of kind of Q&A, but then also just kind of get some experience. I know Mr. Adam and Craig Johnson are both on the call, and I know that they're one of the churches where helped install some of this stuff several years ago, and they've been very consistent as they walked through it over the years. But I wanted to just point out a couple of problems that I've experienced. So I got certified in the God Dreams process the summer of 2016, no, 2017, and just started leading churches through a 2-day visionary planning retreat since then. And so I've done goodness, like 25 different retreats, and trained church planters all over the country, and established churches all over the country in this tool, as I've helped them create it for the first time, but then also kind of coach them as they've implemented it, as they walk it out. And so I just want to highlight a few visionary problems that I've seen personally when it comes to the creation of this, but then also walking out in the execution of this. And the first one that I want to just point out is that you can make the greatest plans and strategies in your workspace or in your church, but your culture is actually going to determine the success of whether or not that is actually going to come to pass. So I was um, in the middle of a retreat. Won't say where, but just a couple years ago, it was in the middle of a retreat, and we got through like the build out of like their beyond the horizon and their background objectives. And it was just kind of a place during the retreat to kind of pause and celebrate this long range vision for their church. Had the pastor come up in front of everybody, and he just shared like, yeah, this is where we're going, like, and just, kind of gave us a quick recap on, this is our long range dream, these are the four big objectives, we're just so excited about all of this. And as soon as he stopped, before anybody else said anything, one of the elders who was in charge of the finances said, I just got one question. Like, as soon as, like, just big celebration moment, lead pastors there, like casting this vision to the team that's creating it for the first time. And this elder points out, he's just like, I just got one question. Who's paying for all this? It's just like, you could just feel the energy of the room, just like, and just the pastor just kind of wanted to die inside. And me as a facilitator, I was just like, are you kidding me, bro? Like, why is that your very first question after going through all of these things? But there was so much tension in the room as we were walking through some of these conversations as to creating a vision for their church, because they had so many just distrust, just elements around their team and around what to do with their finances, and when and how to pay off the building that they were in, and all these just different things. This finance guy and like one or two other people like held the finances of what they had in their reserves like really close to their chest, and like nobody, like one other person on the team that was casting the vision or doing this God Dreams retreat knew actually how much money existed in their account. And like I even offered to, I was like, yeah, so like just a normal question. I was like, so how much money do you have in your reserves, as we were like kind of building this out? And he was just like, yeah, we're not going to say that. I was like, oh, okay. And so I was just kind of taken aback as I was walking through this, and it hindered the whole rest of our process. And I know that it hindered the walking out and the execution as it moved forward, because there was just a fundamental lack of trust that existed at the highest level of this team. And so you guys are probably familiar with this book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. I recently reread this and just kind of walked through some of this stuff with a master's class that I'm taking right now, and it's just so solid whenever you're thinking about a team and execution. And when we want to move towards big vision and big dreams, if you don't have just the foundational aspects of trust in your organization, where people are hiding mistakes, making assumptions about this or that, holding grudges, when people fear conflict, they're avoiding other people, avoiding problems, they don't confront issues or behaviors. Like when you don't have some of this stuff, or a lack of commitment, and even all the way up to a lack of results, this is going to derail your God dreams plan faster than anything. When you don't have the trust, the ability to have healthy conflict, a team that is committed to the vision that you guys have that you've articulated, being able to be held accountable to actually execute on that vision, and then understanding what success actually looks like as you walk out that vision, none of the other stuff that you do is going to matter. And so that's one of my primary things, as I see oftentimes that we just assume we have a healthy culture, and one of those things is just that will derail the execution of your vision so fast. The second one is much more of a practical one, is that when you're building out your 1414, there's no time frames involved. Or I should say, whenever we typically set goals, there's no time frames involved. That's one of the things that the 1414, the Horizon storyline, kind of helps us with, is realize, okay, if we want to accomplish this by the end of the year, like we've got work to do tomorrow, right? And so when we identify those type of things, but so many times we just say, we want to multiply our life groups from 5 to 10, and we'll just leave it at that. And so it's like, well, is that in 6 months? Is that in 6 years? Or, and we don't have any accountability that we've given ourselves because we've not offered timeframes. And so it's just the simplicity of some kind of a SMART goal, which you're, again, probably language that you might be familiar with as a leader, of just having a very specific goal, measurable, specific, where it's just not generic or abstract, a measurable goal. Like we're going to go from this to this, an achievable goal. One of the things that I love that Craig Rochelle talks about is, we have those big, hairy, audacious goals sometimes we're faced as a leader. That's the BHAG. But he talks about we also need to have S bags, which is like a short but achievable goal, like very, very tangible things that you can make progress on. So those big, big God-sized dreams also, but then also the granular, very bite-sized chunks that the 1414 kind of offers. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant goals. Sometimes our goals aren't actually going to directly or even indirectly affect where we're going long term as a leadership team. And then the last one is time bound. So you have a measurable goal from X to Y, but then this is actually, and so this is like 4 disciplines of execution language, where it's from X to Y by this date, by when. And so this quote I pulled from the first discipline of the 4 disciplines of execution. It says, identify where you are now, where you want to be, and by when. Said differently, you define a starting line, a finish line, and a deadline. So that's that time-bound aspect of clearly articulating accomplishable goals. The third problem that I see is oftentimes we just set too many goals. Like we just try and do way too much all at the same time, and our dispersed efforts and our dispersed focus makes all of those an attempt to execute at a much lower level than raising the bar to high excellence. We were even talking with our team this morning, our Nexus team, just talking about the role of excellence in a mission-driven organization. And rather than just saying we follow Jesus, slapping a Jesus bumper sticker on everything we do as an excuse for not doing things well. And being able to really double down and focus on executing, but doing it with excellence is paramount to almost to our witness to those around us. Is that as a Christian leader, as a Christian organization, as a Christian business leader in the marketplace, even, like, we want to be able to do what we do at the highest level, working at everything that we do for the purposes of the Lord. And one of those biggest things that hinders us is that we're trying to do way too much, and it lowers the quality of what we're actually able to execute on. Said differently, Jim Collins mentions that the enemy of great is good. And when you have too many goals, you just get stuck in like this mentality of it's good enough to move on, rather than are we actually executing at a great level here? One of the things that also Jim Collins also says is if you have more than three priorities, you don't have any. Chris McChesney from Four Disciplines of Execution says you focus on the wildly important. There will always be more good ideas than there is capacity to execute. The next one that I see here is a team disconnect. And one of the things that I love about the Horizon storyline is that it offers the right amount of vision content at the right amount of time in the future for the entire leadership team. So if you are somebody that kind of focuses more on the dream, like you are somebody that is more okay with abstract thought. If you are somebody maybe in like the working genius conversation, if you're familiar with Patrick Lencioni's model there, where you're okay with in that wonder mentality of that 30,000 foot view of everything you do. And then there's also some people that love the execution of it, just more of that tenacity of like how do we land the plane on some of these type of things. And so the tool of the Horizon storyline brings these people together, because oftentimes those that like to dream and those that like to execute are on totally different pages, where those that like to dream have never really seen like a plan put in place that just didn't feel like a glorified to-do list. And those that like to execute have never really seen a dream that's actually grounded in reality. And so it's just the tension between those two personality types and productivity types within a team that just often exists. And so as you look at the 1414, if you're more okay with abstract thought and like big high level dreams, you're going to live right here. But if you're more on the tenacity side of execution, you're going to live right here in the long range vision. And then in the short range, high level, that abstract visionary leader is going to be more right here. Whereas more of the tangible people that like to execute love living right here in the four. So it's 1-4 for like abstract thought and then also execution. So it just, again, is a tool that brings the right amount of vision content at the right amount of time in the future for the entire leadership team. But again, that problem is like a team disconnect sometimes on when we put a plan in place to be able to move forward. This next one I'm gonna cruise through, um, but I really want to emphasize this a lot, because having the discipline to execute on the plan is something that I see missed so many times with the 25 plus churches that I've installed the Horizon storyline at. The one of the primary things is that we just get distracted by, the four disciplines of execution language of what we would call just the whirlwind of ministry. Like Sunday's always coming, there's always somebody to meet with. We have funerals, we have weddings, we have graduations, we have Mother's Day, we have all just so Easter, Christmas, like all of the things that are happening, summer events and everything like that. And so many times we just get lost in the whirlwind of everything that we're supposed to be doing, all of the urgent things, that we just miss time and space to focus on the important things, that we're not intentional about saying, what is our high level vision? What do we need to be focused on right now to actually be able to step into this week that would really move the needle as we pursue our long range vision? And this doesn't have to take over your entire work week. This is just saying like, hey, what are some things that you could focus on and that you could commit to doing this week that would help us at least a little bit move the needle towards our long range vision. And when these conversations don't exist, um, and especially when the vision isn't visible to the team and regularly brought up in front of the team, it just is again one of those out of sight, out of mind things. So undisciplined execution. I just reread the Four Disciplines of Execution as I was walking through, just doing a another one of my classes for my master's class on organizational leadership, and it's just so good as you sit and think through, okay, if we use that horizon storyline and we develop a big vision for our church and we just start stair stepping it back, like what do we do with it? Like now we've finalized a 1414, or we've even refreshed a 1414. What do we actually do? And so these are the four disciplines here of focus on the wildly important. What are those primary things rather than just the urgent whirlwind that always just sucks our time? Focus on the wildly important, act on lead measures, things that you can actually affect as a leader and as a team. I'll get to that in a second. Discipline three is keeping a compelling scoreboard of helping you track, like, are we actually making progress towards that vision? When we say from X to Y, like, where are we at now? And like, how are we making progress along the way of getting to that? And then the fourth one is create a cadence of accountability. It's the consistency of reevaluating where are we at? What are we going to do next week to move the needle? So that the focus on the wildly important is, just identify the most important objective that won't be achieved without special attention. Often that's what the majority of your 1414 is. It's not like spell the pastor's name right on the website. It's not, we need to plan our next sermon series. It's not, we need to select the worship set for Sunday. We need to schedule volunteers. Like that's all going to happen in the day-to-day operations of your church. What this is elevating just the different conversation of just saying, if we're going to multiply leaders, if we're going to multiply groups, if we are going to install a leadership pipeline, if we are going to develop a residency program or an internship program, like that's all like high level stuff that you really have to focus on and spend time developing. And so that's what this is. So a wildly important goal is what they call it. This would kind of be in relation to the mid-ground horizon, sometimes a little bit into the initiatives that you're focused on. But the importance of this and the starting line, finish line, and deadline is again just kind of illustrated here by JFK's quote that we will put a man on the moon and return him safely by the end of the decade. When he made that statement, that really kicked NASA into gear. And at the time, they were just focused on some of these abstract things of being a leader in space exploration or some of those type of things, which sounds really solid, which sounds really good. But the problem was it's not specific enough. And so when he comes in and says in front of the whole country, like, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely by the end of the decade, like starting line, finish line, deadline. This is what we're going to do. That lit a fire under the butts of everybody at NASA to be able to move towards that type of a thing. Does that make sense? So that's a wildly important goal, clearly defined, very specific. The second one is to act on lead measures. So the lead measures are predictive of like lag measure success and are influenced directly by the team. For example, if you were going to say, I want to lose 20 pounds, that goal is a lag measure goal, meaning all of the behaviors that would lead you to that goal are the only things that you can affect. The goal itself of losing 20 pounds, you can't do anything with that. You have to, the things that you can measure are diet and exercise, whether you're counting calories or hours at the gym, calories that you take in or calories that you burn. Like just real basic, like weight loss, like mentality. Like those are the things that you can control. And the more that you do of those things, the more it's going to affect the lag measure goal. And so often the wildly important goal is like a lag measure. Let's say, the lag measure, the hard part about this is that the lag measures are usually easiest to measure. Things like, the attendance, billings, and cash are the ABCs of leadership in church, right? The attendance, billings, cash, the billings, bucks, and butts, nickels, nails, and noses. Like those are those things that are just easy to measure because we can count heads, we can count dollars, like they're there. But counting and affecting things that I would actually lead towards that are a little bit more difficult. So if you have a lead measure or a goal of, I'm just going to throw something crazy out. Let's say you have a goal of baptizing 40 people next year. One of the things, like you can't like just go out and force somebody to accept the gospel and dunk them. Like maybe you can in certain areas, but it's just one of those, like you just can't do that. But what are those things that you could measure that might end up leading towards something like that? Well, what if we measured and set a goal for, we want 100% of our people going on 3 prayer walks a year to intentionally try and engage with unchurched people. That's something that you could measure, that Lord willing would result in more people coming to Christ. And so I'm just throwing that out there. I don't really like baptisms as a goal. Sometimes it's kind of a weird number to kind of set and to shoot for, but that's just one of those things, just as an example right there, as you think of the difference between lead measures and lag measures. The third one, I'll go through this quick, is just to keep a compelling scoreboard. People are highly engaged when they know they're making progress towards something. So when you identify X and you identify Y, keeping people engaged and realizing, well, this is what we're hoping for, and this is where we're at along the way. So keeping that in front of people. But this is the primary one in all of this, where you create a cadence of accountability. So you've set a plan in place, but then you want to create a regular rhythm and frequent team meetings that focus on the wildly important goal. A lot of you guys are familiar with the 3/3 discipleship group model, where starting in the middle, you would do like a discovery Bible study and just kind of read a passage from scripture and discern, what is it saying about God? What is it saying about people? Asking real basic questions. The look forward aspect is always getting for like your plan for obedience. Like what are the commitments that you feel like God's calling you to make this year? And so when you're leading a discovery Bible study, it's great to have good conversation, but when you get to the end of it, say, let's pray. What's one thing that you're going to commit to doing this week? And then when we meet again next week, we're going to look back and celebrate the obedience that we did. And so it's focused on a high expectation, obedience based style discipleship where you read the word, you make a commitment. If this is true, then I'm going to commit to doing this year, this week. That I feel like God's calling me to reach out to this person or to go on a prayer walk or to give, a little bit more or to do whatever it is that you feel like God's calling you to do. Writing that down and then coming back next week and staying accountable to the people that you're learning from. Why these are effective is because you're holding people accountable to something that they chose to do. And then it's that you're not dictating, that you're asking them to make a commitment and just pray about it and say, what do you feel like God's leading you to? And then doing that. And so that's one of the things that just makes it very effective in this. And so when it comes to visionary execution, the cadence of accountability is very similar. And the idea is that you would hold a regular team meeting, um, 15 minutes at a time, maybe 20 minutes at a time, where you would review what happened last week. You would review your high level goals, review what happened last week, make a commitment to one or two things by simply asking the question, what's the most important thing I can do this week that will have the biggest impact on the scoreboard or on where our vision is taking us? And that this would be a regular occurrence for all of the execution of your vision. When that's missing, that undisciplined execution is one of the biggest problems that we face. Just want to open it up real quick. We'll do some Q&A. But for those of you that are familiar with the tool, and other ideas that you've had, other problems that you had, or maybe questions that you have about this tool as it relates to maybe your ministry specifically. Craig, have you guys run into any other problems that have just kind of like derailed you or hindered you from kind of executing on some of that?
The most obvious one that springs to mind is the impact of COVID. Um,
Yeah,
we began our participation in this God Dreams initiative thing uh, before COVID really got rolling. Um, and I don't want to act as though that anomaly of global pandemic meant that the kingdom was interrupted. It was just sort of diverted, and that we had to make some adjustments and adaptations to it.
yeah,
But even then, there's a bigger picture because for some people, maybe COVID was that. For other people, there may have been a change in leadership that occurred during the middle of their process, a church building down, any number of things that could happen. And while you were talking, Andrew, I was thinking about how all these different mechanisms, methods, that kind of thing. It's really good to have a construct that you're aiming for, but the old adage that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face or until the bullets start flying, that is a thing that has allowed us to embrace, to realize, adjust, and keep on moving forward um, with the biggest picture. And maybe it is that wild idea, big picture. For us, it's the spiritual formation that produces leadership development, and that as a cycle that just keeps spinning. We haven't lost sight of that. The 1414 stuff has adjusted and adapted in the smaller time frames, but the big picture, we have not taken our eyes off that ball. And we don't do meet weekly, but we meet every month with our God Dreams team, even though the complexion of that team has changed as people moved in and moved out. The idea is that we're still on track. So those are some really basic ideas of the necessity for sticking to it in the long run. I mean, it's not a quick fix. It is, you can't lead somebody to a place you're not willing to go. And so the leaders have to be followers of Jesus in the most literal sense if they hope to lead those in their congregation and those outside the kingdom. And so, yeah, it's an incremental but persevering kind of thing.
yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, there's always a lot of those disruptions, like you mentioned, COVID or different things, and that's one of the things that I love about just the flexibility even within some of the tool is that like it doesn't have to when something big comes up in your organization. Like another example was a church team that I had installed this with went into like a building project and they just went full on into like campaign mode and just omitted like using the tool entirely for like a year and a half. And it was just one of those things where it's just like, well, this could have like plugged and played into the mid ground and one of your foreground initiatives. Like you didn't have to just totally abandon it. Um, but that was the same thing a little bit with COVID, where it was just like, depending on the style of the 1414, like that you had kind of laid out, it may have only had to change like one, two, maybe three of the 10 boxes. And it didn't have to like you don't have to scrap your entire vision, which that's what it felt like a lot for a lot of church leaders was like we had this grand 2020 vision, man. I mean, if there was a year to have vision as a church leader, that was it. And then it was just like 3, 4 months into it, it was just like, whoops. But being able to articulate your vision in that way, it was a little bit more adaptable. Adam, anything you'd add to that?
You know, after we had set that vision and went through that weekend with you, there was major disruptions. We had one of our elders sleep with one of our youth leaders, and it tanked the entirety of the youth group because there was major division in that. Um, There was COVID on top of that. Obviously, there was, I mean, just major disruptions. But I think of some of that, the vision problems that you identified, we saw those as strengths of ours, that we were able to continue in and do, and be, and that didn't dictate who we were. Those problems actually made us double down harder on spiritual formation than anything else. And you know, it was kind of like, I think of Nehemiah. We quoted often around here, in Nehemiah 6. They, you know, they're trying to get Nehemiah to stop the work, and he said, "Hey, man, I'm doing a great work, and I cannot come down."
Yep.
And we have found that this vision framing process for us has helped us stay on task, and that actually filters out all the day-to-day crap. If it doesn't lead towards spiritual formation, what's the point? And why
Yeah.
would we give our time to that? Um, Case in point, there was marriage counseling I was doing last week with a couple, and they said, "Hey, let's set a date for Wednesday." I said, "Great." And then I found out that one of the college ministries, there was 5 guys that were speaking, that we as leadership of Whitewater had spoken to them on a very intensive, what they call noblemen's weekend, for leadership development. And I found out those 5 guys were speaking and talking about what they learned. So I said to this marriage counseling, which is also a spiritual formative process, right? This premarital counseling. I just said, "Hey, I got to bail on that, because I need to go see these guys and hear what they have to say." And just paying into what's actually important versus the, you know, this marriage premarital counseling can wait for this week. These guys need my attention now. And so it has helped dictate and shift focus where focus needs to be, and has really filtered out the day to day, I think, for us, and for what we do and say yes to and no to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's solid information. That's good. But anybody else on the call, do you guys have, or even Craig and Adam, feel free to ask as well. But any questions as it relates to just kind of walking through the 1414?
The beyond the horizon vision. Who really is that a created by committee or by the leader, and then gets honed by the committee?
Yeah, that's
Committee's a bad word, but the leadership team, whatever. But
yeah,
it feels like as you know, Andrew, you served a nonprofit, took a nonprofit that I was director of through this. And it seems like they got bogged down on the beyond the horizon vision, because it started becoming a committee thing. And to me, that feels like this is where we're headed.
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. I think that I I'm a big proponent of team leadership and team being able to speak into it, because it brings a deeper level of ownership and even accountability of just saying like, hey, like we said together this is where we're going. Now the senior leader of a nonprofit or a church or whatever is the primary champion of the beyond the horizon, or should be the primary champion, and like chief reminding officer, or if you would, like, of just like, hey, FYI, we are still like pursuing this with everything we have, like in the midst of everything that we're doing. So there's a lot of that championing has to take place from the senior leadership. But when you go through the development process, I, have led dozens of organizations through the creation of this, and we do it together as a team. My primary fear that I encounter from senior leaders, particularly in churches, when we approach the 2-day retreat, is that I'm afraid that the team is going to hijack the vision. Like, all right, I just have this fear in the back of my mind that we're going to get in conversation and that the team's going to hijack the vision. Now, maybe I've just been lucky, but every single time, and this is just a testament to the culture that you're shaping as a senior leader, every single time that I've led conversation through the articulation or deeper articulation of the direction of their church or their organization. The team exists because they are connected to the senior leader and because they're connected to the ownership of the culture, the ownership of the leadership, the ownership of just the organization that is being shaped. And so there's so much affirmation, like even though that fear exists in the back of the mind of the leader, there's so much affirmation that takes place during the actual conversations because everybody is in that room giving 2 days of their time because they believe in the success and they love the people that they get to do it with. And so there's so much opportunity for deeper ownership in that. Now, it's a tension that we face oftentimes in church planting because the the church planter is setting the initial vision without a team being in place. Like they have to go out and cast the vision and fundraise. They have to go out and make it happen, right? And so that's a kind of a unique situation in that entrepreneurial mindset where, yeah, like the vision does come from them, but I just say like, hey, you need to have a clear picture of where you're going, but as quickly as possible you want to have your team being able to speak into like the fleshing out of some of that stuff as you walk through the execution of that vision because you're never going to execute alone. And the best way to get engagement and ownership is to allow other people to speak into some of the direction of your church. And it doesn't mean you have to abdicate your leadership. Like you were just inviting people to play in an organization and in a church that they love. And so you're inviting them to be a key contributor into some of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty against like, the senior leaders like kind of goes up to the mountain, hears from God, comes down, kicks down the door, presents the vision of the church and says, here we go. Like, this is where we're going, get on board or jump off. Like that's, I'm adamantly opposed to that style of leadership. But at the same time, yeah, like at early stages of the church planting world, the senior leader kind of has to play that role just out of necessity.
But eventually, shared vision is what's gonna, people get behind a vision, right? And when it's a shared vision, it's going to be stronger and able to push forward and impact the kingdom that way, right? Where you
Yeah.
don't have disunity around. But so what I just heard you say is as the church plant grows, it's time to start identifying some leaders to get behind the vision and make it a shared vision.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
even maybe starting to work out the 3 and the 1 and the 4 and the 1 and the 4
Yeah.
as a team.
Yeah. Because even beyond just the centerpiece of the vision frame, when you go back to every part of the vision frame, so even in a church planting mindset, so at the art of the start, I encourage leaders to only articulate 2 to 3 values that these are going to be core values to who I am as a leader, but then allow room for growth as your team develops and as the gift mixes like are inherent in your team within like the first couple of years. Like maybe God brings all sorts of people that you just never counted on, and some of the value of the team is a little bit different than what you thought it was going to be, and that's okay. But as you evaluate that collectively, it's just a really interesting conversation there. But then as for sure, as you build out the 1-4-1-4, it can definitely influence in particular different boxes as you go through that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, I know that there's a boatload of more content that we could kind of dive into on the whole God Dreams conversation, but this was just a high level look at the tool itself, and then just some of the problems that I've encountered over the years as you go through some of the execution and what that there are dozens of tools that you can use, in particular in the refresh of how you can kind of refresh your vision every 90 days. kind of maybe planning like a half day thing, like every year to kind of re-go through all of it and just set what's the most important thing for this year. So there's a lot of good best practices and things of that nature. So I'm happy to reach out and have conversations to anybody that needs to just a little bit more deeper clarity on that. I'll have a couple of videos on my website that I give like a brief overview of some of these things. One is an overview of the Horizon storyline in general. It's like a 6-minute video that I kind of created. And then this one is a little bit longer one where I walk through the creation of that Beyond the Horizon. Kind of starts with those 12 templates that are spelled out in the book God Dreams. And so I just do a kind of it's about 15 minutes. You put that sucker on like 2x speed and have me talk really fast and just plow through it. But being able to just kind of understand a little bit better, what are the different kinds of vision that we could be focused on? Because oftentimes the hardest one to come up with is, what does that beyond the horizon, like 5-year vision actually look like for our church? And so the thing to spark conversation around that are some of those 12 templates right there. So you can kind of see that on my my website, thevisionclarity.org/goddreams. Have that there. I do a lot of 2-day visionary planning retreats to be able to install this to churches. I would love to work with you and your church if you guys want to either do like a virtual like refresh of your God dreams, or just to be able to walk through just anything and everything that you have more questions on that. So that's all I have to say about that. So appreciate your guys' time. Thanks, Adam and Craig, for jumping on. Love what you guys shared.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yep. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Bye-bye.